Here we go. Okay, 2026, April 1973. Okay, we're sticking with e4. We're sticking with e4. Okay, French. So let's play mainline. You know, we've been playing e5 exclusively for the duration of the speedruns. I want to vary it up a little bit. Actually, you know what? Let me introduce you to the Tarrasch variation. What I actually play myself is knight d2. This is the Tarrasch variation. I'll talk about it more thoroughly after the game. Now, the basic idea of putting the knight on d2, as opposed to putting it on c3, because what should probably jump out at you if you've never played this before is that you're blocking in your own bishop. Like, why would you do that? Well, the reason you would do that is that you can meet c5 with the move c3, and you can keep your center intact. So in a way, you kind of get the best of all of the worlds. You get to develop your pieces, and you get to keep your center intact. And the other knight is going to be responsible for defending d4. Now, this line has an interesting history. For many years, for many decades, knight e2 was considered automatic here. It was thought that the move knight gf3, which may look more natural, is inferior, and yet we're going to play it. That changed about 25 years ago when computers came around and people started to figure out that knight gf3 is perhaps more testing than the move knight e2. And queen b6 is the classical old line. This is the reason why people in the old days thought that knight gf3 was bad, because simply you have a hard time defending d4. But then computers came along and asked a very interesting question. What happens if you don't defend d4 at all? If you simply sacrifice that pawn, and in return, you get a lead in development, more space, and a clamp on the center with a pawn on e5. So black is going for the line. We take on d4. And now without this next move, white's entire position would collapse, because right now the bishop is hanging, the pawn is hanging. So we play knight f3. Now, if you're an e4 player, you're probably familiar with certain this is not the only variation of the French where you give up the d4 pawn. Far from the only one. The Milner-Berry gambit, there's a bunch of lines where you sacrifice the pawn on d4, but here we have to follow up very accurately. Otherwise, black is going to consolidate and we're going to have no compensation. Does anybody know what the main move is here for white? Our opponent clearly knows this. He's playing quickly. What is white's best move here? Yes, queen a4 is correct. You have to stop the knight from coming to c5. And of course, this deploys the queen, and it prepares to swing the queen over to the other side of the board. Queen g4 becomes a serious idea. So serious that we're going to play it right now. Queen g4, attacking g7. Obviously, black cannot castle, because that runs into bishop h6, winning the exchange. And if black plays g6, we can still put our bishop on h6. In fact, we will do that. We've got very serious control over the dark squares. Bishop f8. Well, that's a pretty serious concession. Okay, so this is one of those positions where nothing happens fast here. We're not going to mate black in like 3 seconds. What we're going to do is mount a slower campaign that's based on massaging the weak dark squares and getting our rook into the game, getting our other rook perhaps to e1 in order to overprotect the e5 pawn. So there's like a lot of ways that we could handle this position. We could take the bishop, right? We could take the bishop. We could keep the bishop and drop it back to g5, although I don't really like that, because then black can fianchetto. If we are to move the bishop, we should probably move it back to e3, because that's a tempo move. Other than all of that, the move that I really like, queen f4, queen g5 looks pretty good. But if we play queen f4, then black might have this move, queen b4. Well, actually, then we have queen c1. Let's go for it. Let's go queen f4. And we got to speed up a little bit here. I took a while on this move. Yeah, b2 is hanging. b2 is hanging, but we're happy to sacrifice that pawn, right? In these lines, you have to be ready to sacrifice 2, sometimes even 3 pawns in order to maintain your control over the position. In case he doesn't take on b2, I will show you after the game sort of approximately what I intend to do after queen takes b2. And I don't know yet. Well, actually, now I do. I think there is a very interesting move after queen takes b2. And probably our opponent is thinking about it right now, whether to take that pawn. Yeah, knight g5. I'm trying to make that move work. By the way, that is a threat. Knight g5, attacking f7, is a serious threat here. Yeah, no, this is This is juicy. Notice, why are we even keeping the tension? Well, the reason we're keeping the tension, we want that queen on h6. We want to prevent black from castling if possible. Although if black does castle, it's not the end of the game. I mean, we can still play knight g5. And this is not a position that I would recommend for, 12 or 1300 with white, because it is very, very difficult. This is among the most difficult types of positions to handle, where you've sacrificed not just any pawn, but a center pawn that's passed. And your compensation is positional. It's not like you're immediately attacking or there's an obvious set of moves that leads to mate. Right? You're just sort of massaging the position slowly, finding little inroads, ways to keep the initiative going. And even for GMs, these positions are very hard to handle. Queen d8. Okay, so this is a perfect opportunity for us to bring some pieces into the game. You can't play these positions unless you're patient and unless you understand that where does the compensation come from? It comes from, our superior piece activity. So the no-brainer move that we should play here is rook a to c1. This stops knight c5, confining the knight to d7. Obviously, the c file is very important. It's the only open file. And as I've said many times during the speedrun games, when there is only one open file, you want to make sure, if possible, that you are the one who controls it. And this is a classic example of how effective that control can be, because if black plays queen e7, then we will immediately infiltrate to c7. So we have, I think, a very cool idea here. This idea is, I wouldn't necessarily call it typical, but it exists in positions where, your opponent has all of the pawns on one color like this. We want to try to chip away at black's pawn shell, right? Black's pawn cover is the only thing that is holding our pieces back from breaking through. One idea that's very straightforward is to double on the c file, rook c2 and rook c1, and then trying to double get into c7. But the move that I really like is h4. We're trying to get this pawn down to h5. Why are we trying to do that? Well, the g6 pawn is our primary target. If we play h5 and black ignores us, then we will take on g6, fg6, and bishop takes g6 with devastating effect. Black is ignoring us. Let's go. h5. Chipping away at black's pawn cover. This should make sense, without me even over-explaining this. Knight c5. Now it's time for some tactics. Now your first instinct should not be, let's move the bishop. Your first instinct should be, let's calculate h takes g6 and try to make that work. Let's try to calculate that. So hg6, let's say that black takes the bishop, okay? Because if h takes g6, f takes g6, then we have bishop takes g6. So h takes g6, knight takes d3. Then we can play g takes f7 check, but we can also play the move g7. Ooh, and g7 is really juicy. Yeah, g7, queen h7. That's got to be the way. Bang. Let's go. g7, queen h7, because that actually attacks the knight and it attacks the rook. So worst comes to worst, we reestablish material equality. But let's not rush. I think we might have a better move. I am very attracted to queen g7 here, actually. I'm very attracted to queen g7. Because after rook f8, which is forced, we play gh, knight takes c1, rook takes c1, and we can basically promote at our leisure. I'm pretty sure... Oh, but he has king d7. Oh, he's got king d7. That's annoying. No, let's stick to g7. It was worth exploring, but I think we should stick to this. Queen h7. Okay, so king e7 is annoying, but we're just going to have to deal with it. There's so many, I wish we had more time here, because there's so many juicy options to explore. And instead, we're just going to end up playing very technically here. Yeah, so here, for example, we have to take here, and then black takes here, and we're winning this because the king is in terrible shape and the bishop is bad, but this will take some more finesse. Okay, so now I think is a perfect opportunity for us to think about doubling on the c file. But also queen a3. Queen a3 looks like a really juicy move. Yes, we're playing queen a3 without even thinking. We are making our way into d6, into the mouth of madness. And queen e7 is, I had a feeling that black would do this. And this is the point that I've been making consistently as we hit 2000, which is that when you're like 1300, you put a little pressure on your opponent, they collapse. At this level, people still collapse, but that collapse comes later, right? You have to put a sustained, 10, 15 moves of serious pressure on somebody before they finally make a blunder. And I think we saw that very clearly here. This is an elementary blunder. Rook c7 is hopefully an idea that everybody is familiar with, winning the queen. Bang. And it's mate to follow. The other rook comes out to c1. Yeah, this is a pretty nice technical game. Good illustration of the power of this line, by the way. Okay, wait, let's not... Yeah, rook c1, okay. Okay, and remember that when you are trying to win such positions efficiently, do not get tunnel vision in regards to checkmate, right? Remember that you can use the weakness of the king in order to win a bunch of material. Now, in this case, we actually have checkmate, but a good move would have been to play queen f8. But in this case, or rook takes c8, queen d6 check leads to immediate checkmate if you calculate it. This is mate in 3, or maybe mate in 4. And he resigns. Yeah, king a8, rook takes bishop. Okay. That was a nice game. All right, so this line is called the Tarrasch. It's named after Siegbert Tarrasch, who was top 5 in the world, for sure, in the late 1800s. So Siegbert Tarrasch was born 1862, died 1934, German. And he was not only influential as a player, he was an opening expert, and he wrote a lot, and he had very strong opinions on how chess should be played and how chess should be taught. And the way that chess history is usually presented, I don't know how much of this is like 100. It's not cut and dried, but it is said that Tarrasch butted heads with Nimzowitsch and people who pertain to the hypermodern school. Like Tarrasch believed that you had to control the center. You had to play traditionally, the Sicilian was bunk. He was very old school, but he was also very good. So this idea that people seem to share, that Tarrasch was just a loser who, was dogmatic and, adhered to the old rules that nobody, he was like the Luddite. He was the guy who used the flip phone. Everybody had smartphones. That's not totally true, because he actually beat the crap out of Nimzowitsch like a gazillion times. So, and out of a lot of other people. So Tarrasch was really good. And, you don't just like stumble into having topical lines named after you that are still being played today. So knight d2, Tarrasch decisions. So knight d2 is the second most popular move after knight c3, with the advanced variation clocking in at number 3. And, well, as I explained, the idea of putting the knight on d2 is actually very, very simple. Knight c3 has the serious drawback of allowing bishop b4. This is the win-over variation. Knight d2 takes the sting out of all of these shenanigan type moves. Bishop b4 now is totally ineffective due to c3. And the secondary reason is that you are unblocking the c-pawn in the event the black challenges your center, as black did in the game. We can play the move c2, c3 in order to support the d4 pawn. So knight f6 is one of two main responses to the Tarrasch. The other is the immediate c5. In the modern day, people go knight gf3 here. There's a lot of theory. We're not going to talk about this right now. So knight f6, e5, knight d7. This is super, super old theory. This has been around forever. c5, c3. Obviously, similarities to the advanced variation. And after knight c6, we reach like this fork in the road. The move knight gf3 has been around for a very long time. In fact, little historical detour. Let's see when the first time that this position occurred was. I wonder if it was before 1900 or after 1900. So the first time that this position was, drumroll please. Oh, it was the first 3 times that this position occurred was Tarrasch, all Tarrasch. 1890, 1891, 1892. How about that? That doesn't just happen. Alekhine played it. Tarrasch played knight e2. In fact, everybody played knight e2. The first guy to play knight gf3 was a guy named Israel Horowitz, very strong international master, in 1938. Everybody had been playing knight e2 until Horowitz and Pollock. William Henry Pollock in 1891 played knight gf3 and lost. And the second guy to play knight g3 was Frank Marshall, after whom the Marshall Chess Club is named. But you can clearly see how chess understanding has grown, because in the Marshall game, in this position, he played the move queen a4, which is not considered good anymore. But you could see that in like the 30s, the idea of sacrificing the d4 pawn here would be, that just wouldn't cross the radar of most players, even the strongest attacking players like Marshall. So knight e2 is not a bad move, right? Knight e2 and knight f3 are about equivalent according to theory. The reason that everybody played knight e2 is because after queen b6, you have the move knight f3, and you can support the pawn on d4. Most people didn't want to play knight g3 precisely because of queen b6. Now, the theory of this line has ballooned, and now black has a gazillion moves here. There's g5, there's just bishop e7, there's a5. Now, queen b6 is still considered to be a very reputable variation. Okay, so we sack on d4, we get the knight out to f3, we force the queen back, we go queen a4 to tie down the knight and prepare to deploy our queen to g4. The main move here is actually queen b4, which, I mean, the queen trade is out of the question for white because we're down a pawn. So we drop back to c2. Now the old school variation goes queen c5, offering another queen trade. Now you can make a draw with queen a4, but queen e2 is the more combative line. Finally, black develops the bishop. So does white. The queen moves back to a5, and you get essentially a position like this, which the engine generally evaluates as approximately equal, but black is just so cramped. I love playing these positions with white. I feel like white's having all of the fun here. Although Wesley crushed me in a rapid game in one of these lines. Like Wesley just got all his pieces out, and I had to resign because I was down a pawn. Anyways, the speedrun isn't really about delving into openings in particular. This is something that you could investigate on your own if you are interested in like the theory of this line and exactly how where the compensation comes from. You can look this up using Opening Explorer and stuff. So in the game, I apologize. In the actual game, he played bishop e7, which is a move. It is a bunch of games in the database. Queen g4. But generally, black wants to avoid having to play g6 in these positions. Castles, I can probably show the Wesley game. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, I played very poorly against Wesley in this line. I just let him get all his pieces out. In the meantime, yeah, so here bishop h6, and you don't even have to take the rook. I mean, you can do our idea with h4, h5. Yeah, so g6, bishop h6 is kind of automatic. And I still see 2 games in the database after bishop f8. Oh, Nedev, 2482 grandmaster. So a bunch of people had this position. Okay, I think I found the Wesley game. Yes, I did. Slightly different variation. A little bit different, but you'll get the point. You can see the board. Okay, so this is my game against Wesley. 2015. Rapid online game. So, yeah, so we had this entire thing going on. And then, okay, he went for a slightly different version of this, but we basically got the same position. But it's a worse version for white because you can't bring the queen to a4. And that was really, really tilting to me. So I just kind of okay, I play bishop e3. Wesley goes knight c5. Very high level move, pinning his own knight. But the point is that the knight is so well protected by all of black's pieces that you actually cannot easily put pressure on it. So I give a check, he covers it. Notice that Wesley does not mind taking back with the king, just because the king on d7 is perfectly safe. It's sheltered by this little pawn cover that's impossible to bring down. Knight d4, he takes it, he castles. I was making all of the moves I'm supposed to make, but at this point I was just okay, I'm down a pawn, I have nothing for it. Bishop h6 is no longer dangerous for black because of bishop f8. And he just ends up killing me here. Queen a6, unpinning. Bang. Sacking the exchange. And pinning my own bishop. Distracting the queen, taking the pawn. I mean, this game wasn't even close. He just played perfectly. I resign in this position. Yeah, Wesley on a good day is honestly just a literal engine. It's crazy. Rook e2, knight c1, by the way, traps the rook, so I resigned. But in any case, like, you should be very careful when you play this line with white, obviously. You should try to know, you should know, like, all the details. Back to the game. After bishop f8, we decided to keep the tension with queen f4. And this is, I think, a very serious mistake by black. Players at this level, as I've explained many times, struggle to keep the tension. And this just gives white's queen prime real estate penthouse, Manhattan penthouse overlooking Central Park. I mean, this is the square that the queen is coveting. So bishop takes h6 is a very, I mean, it's a move that lacks resilience. You know what I'm saying? So instead, the move that got me worried, and it still has me worried, is queen b4, using the bishop to offer a queen trade. And if queen c1, who can tell me how black can continue harassing white's queen? What's the same move with the same idea, after which I think a draw is pretty likely? Yeah, queen c5. Do you see what the point is? The point is that the white queen has to remain pegged to the bishop. But whichever square the queen goes to, whether it's d2, f4, or even g5, black's queen has a corresponding square on which he can offer a queen exchange. Now, I will say that trading is not out of the question here. Maybe you can go for this type of position, and maybe you can argue that even in the endgame, white's control over the dark squares and black's passive pieces give white good compensation for the pawn. Maybe, maybe not. I'd be reluctant to go into an endgame like this. I mean, the extra pawn like this in the endgame is a big, big deal. So I think queen b4 would have led to perhaps a repetition. Instead, we trade on h6, and this is where things go completely downhill for black. Queen d8, I think this is another bad move. If you ask me, the way that I would handle this with black is I would make it a priority, a top priority, to try to either get the queen out of h6, so maybe still queen b4 and queen f8, or at least try to get your pieces out of their unbelievably passive squares. Go knight c5, go bishop d7. At least try to get your stuff out. We had a couple of questions about queen takes b2. I don't really have a clear answer for you other than that I was planning a move like rook a c1. I was just going to keep bringing pieces into the game. These pawns are irrelevant. And the other idea that I had to make this move knight g5 work. Now, if you go knight g5 prematurely, who can spot black's incredibly annoying defense? Black has a move that, you know, that calls the cops on the party that we're having. Yeah, that's knight takes c5. No, it's not f6. If you play f6, you white breaches the, you know, black's position springs a leak once you take on e6. But the problem is knight takes c5. So thinking logically, you can say, okay, why is knight takes c5 a thing? Well, it's a thing because the queen also defends that pawn. So let's try to force that queen off of this diagonal. Let's try to make it take on a2. And now we can go knight g5. And this is crushing. If bishop takes h6, then obviously this is checkmate. Now the issue is that it's not so simple because black does not have to cooperate. And black can play the move queen c3. But now we can keep the same process going with rook b3. Again, I don't want to like delve too deeply into this position because it gets a little boring. I think people get the point. The point is just that we have more active pieces. Black's position is riddled with weak pawns and a weak king. And all of those things put together give white compensation for the pawns. I think compensation, that concept is very poorly taught because a lot of people who teach it make the concept of compensation sound like some mystical thing that GMs kind of can just tell when you have compensation and regular people can't. Well, there's nothing about white's compensation that should be mysterious. You should see it visually. Now, in some positions, compensation can be hard to evaluate properly, like the amount of it, but this is not one of them. Anyways, bishop h6, queen d8. We deploy a rook to c1. After a6, like I said, there are many, many good ways to handle this position, but we decided to apply this very classic idea of h4, h5. I think this idea is very clear. We are using our pawns in order to completely destroy black's pawn cover so that our pieces can then infiltrate more effectively. I think a lot of people here would be tempted to play queen g7. But are you really telling me that the best you can do is spend 2 tempi and take the corner pawn on h7? Now you could say, well, it's not so much the pawn that I'm taking, I'm preparing to sacrifice the bishop on g6. And then I'd say, you're making a good point, but I'm not sure that this is the most effective use of your resources. Black can play queen e7, and the sack on g6 looks pretty lackluster here. So I think h4 is very thematic and very, very strong. b6, h5. And if black takes on h5, then we can already consider the move knight g5 with the very nice tactical detail that if black now takes on e5, you have the move queen g7, forking the rook and the knight. And if knight takes d3, this is checkmate. What was black's plan with b6? My guess is that he wanted to play bishop b7 and rook c8 to contest the c file, but you know, this is a runaway train on the king side. We're already crashing through completely. Takes, and here I'm sure the engine will laugh at me and find something a lot better, but we decided to win back the knight, and I mean, this position is just miserable for black. Probably the most resilient move is king e8 here, and make no mistake, the game goes on. I mean, material is equal. Black does have the g file, so this is not over. I mean, we're much better here, no question about it, but queen e7 was total collapse. Rook c7, and it's all over. Okay, I think this was a good little illustration of the Tarrasch variation. It's a very dynamic line. If you want to learn this, you definitely need to study this line very, very carefully. I'm going to leave you with that. Thanks for hanging out, guys, and I'll see you guys later.